Officers stepped into a 6th-floor Tenderloin loft and found a scene that made no sense at first glance. The apartment was tidy, a leather couch, glass coffee table, laptop glowing on a metal desk. On the polished concrete floor lay Marcus Trell, face down in a pool of blood. 11 stab wounds had torn through his chest and abdomen. The knife rested on the coffee table, still slick. Sitting on the couch was Vanessa Chen, 38, venture capitalist, married, no prior record. She had called 911 herself, hands folded in her lap, clothes flecked with blood, eyes fixed on nothing. When an officer asked what happened, her voice was flat. "He wouldn't let me leave. I defended myself." It sounded simple. A woman, a threat, a knife, a choice. But the crime scene told a different story. The door wasn't forced. No overturned furniture, no defensive wounds on Marcus's hands. On the desk, his laptop displayed files labeled logs, photos, audio. Marcus Trell had been her rented boyfriend, her paid alibi, and in the months before his death, the man who held her life hostage. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back 6 months. Back to a marriage that looked perfect but felt hollow. Back to a single decision that felt harmless at the time. Downloading an app. 6 months earlier, Vanessa's life photographs beautifully. Glass condo on Telegraph Hill, partner at a venture capital firm, designer restaurants, charity galas, always the right dress, always the right smile. She was also married, at least on paper. Her husband, David Chen, was a tech executive whose days blurred into red-eye flights and board meetings. When he was home, he slept. When he was awake, he was on calls. They shared a mortgage, a last name, and almost nothing else. No screaming, no drama, just two exhausted people maintaining an image neither cared about anymore. In Vanessa's world, appearances mattered. Showing up alone to investor dinners became a story. A missing husband became a rumor. One night, after a fintech panel, another woman slid a card across the table. If you're tired of arriving solo, there's a service for that, completely discreet. The card read, Companion Plus. Vanessa researched it that night. The website was polished and vague. Professional companionship for discerning clients. No mention of sex, just curated matches for events with background checks and strict NDAs. She rationalized it easily. Not an escort, a social buffer. Someone to fill the empty chair at galas David skipped. Someone to absorb questions before they reached her. She clicked apply. Within a week, she received a short list of companions. One profile stood out, Marcus T., 34, former hospitality manager, well-reviewed for reading rooms and remembering details. She booked him for a charity gala. Marcus arrived on time in a tailored navy suit. He knew her firm's partners, which founders had raised rounds, and how to step aside during business conversations. He posed for photos like someone she had known for years. The app logged everything: arrival time, location, publicly visible photos. At night's end, Companion Plus generated a summary with timestamps and proof. If anyone asked where she had been or who she had been with, she now had an alibi. At first, that was all she wanted. Proof. But within weeks, Vanessa began using Marcus for something darker. She met other men, anonymous hookups from dating apps, while Marcus provided visible cover. She paid him to be seen with her in public so no one would question where she had actually been in private. The system worked perfectly. Until Marcus noticed the pattern and realized what she was hiding, and understood exactly how much her secrets were worth. By the time 6 months had passed, that same app, designed to protect her from questions, would hold every answer police needed to understand why Marcus Trell ended up dead, and why Vanessa Chen, who built her career on managing risk, decided the greatest risk of all was letting him leave that apartment alive. For a while, Companion Plus did exactly what Vanessa paid for. Marcus became her standard +1. He appeared at conferences, charity dinners, and rooftop launches. He knew when to speak, when to vanish, and how to make them look like a couple who belonged in those rooms together. On paper, everything lined up. The app's logs showed a neat sequence of bookings with the same man at respectable venues. Her social media matched. Tagged photos, group shots, Marcus at her side. To anyone looking, she had a busy career and a dependable partner. Underneath that story, there was another. Some nights Marcus was the whole evening. Other nights, he was just the opening scene. Vanessa arrived with him, made sure they were seen, then left early and disappeared into hotel rooms with men whose names she barely remembered. If David ever checked, there was always proof she had been exactly where she said she was. She thought she was using the system. She didn't see that someone inside it was already using her. Detectives later learned that Marcus had turned his dashboard into a hunting ground. He built private spreadsheets the company had never requested: client initials, income bracket, public visibility, marital status, panic level. Notes like talks after wine, asks for extra photos, needs airtight alibi. Vanessa's row filled quickly. High-earning partner, frequently absent husband, repeated cover bookings, occasional slips about confidential deals. She wasn't just lonely, she was exposed. Marcus exported her booking history, saved chats where she adjusted times to match personal plans, and pulled GPS traces showing nights when her phone drifted from official venues and sat motionless in hotel zones. In his files, her name changed color from black to red. The first demand arrived wrapped as a warning. One Tuesday, Vanessa got a text from an unknown number. "It's Marcus. We should talk off-platform. Security issue." They met at a bar far from her usual circuit. Marcus looked less like a date and more like someone delivering bad news. He said he had seen irregular access to Companion Plus logs, that if they leaked, clients with complicated lives would be the first to burn. Then he turned his phone toward her. On the screen was her booking list: dates, locations, notes like cover for personal plans. Beneath it, a grainy hotel still. Vanessa entering with a man who wasn't Marcus, time-stamped on a night she'd told David she was at a networking dinner. Marcus didn't threaten to send it anywhere. He just said, "If I can pull this, someone else can. I'm trying to stay ahead of it, for both of us." Then came the offer. For an additional monthly fee, he would monitor her records, scrub risky data, make sure nothing was left in the system. $3,000 a month. Vanessa pictured that still frame in David's inbox on her firm's compliance screen in a tech headline. She agreed before she finished her drink. It didn't stop there. 3,000 became 5, 5 became 8. Each time she hesitated, Marcus produced something new. An audio clip of her mentioning a confidential merger, screenshots where she begged him to make the alibi airtight, transaction histories showing cash withdrawals she couldn't explain. He never called it blackmail. He called it protection, but every payment proved she was afraid. Late one night, Vanessa sat at her kitchen island, staring at months of transfers, and finally saw the shape of the trap. There was no price that bought safety. The moment she paid Marcus once, she had stopped being a client and became a hostage. She opened a blank browser tab and typed, "How to stop a blackmailer," then just watched the cursor blink, knowing whatever came next would be worse than anything she had done so far. Vanessa didn't hit enter on that search. She stared at the words, "How to stop a blackmailer," until the browser timed out. A part of her still believed she could buy her way out, that if she paid enough, often enough, Marcus would get bored and move on. He didn't. Instead, the demands hardened. The next message didn't pretend to be about security. It landed on a Friday evening while Vanessa was reviewing a pitch deck. $100,000, wired by Tuesday, or I send everything to David, your firm, and a journalist I know will publish. Last chance. Attached was a compressed file preview. Her bookings, lobby footage, screenshots of texts where she lied about her location, a clipped audio segment of her discussing a confidential acquisition over dessert. For the first time, he named a number big enough to ruin her immediately. That weekend, Vanessa moved through her life like a ghost. She sat across from David at a brunch, watching him scroll emails, and pictured his face as he opened that file. She imagined her partners calling emergency board meetings, investors pulling capital, reporters using the word hypocrite. She considered confessing everything, then imagined David using her admissions as ammunition in divorce court, her firm framing it as moral failing to distance themselves. She didn't have good options. She had degrees of disaster. On Monday, she wired Marcus $50,000, half of what he asked. His reply was instant. "Appreciated, balance due in full. You still have time." In that moment, Vanessa understood the truth. There was no balance. There was only escalation. The choice to fight back came in pieces. First, she printed her bank statements and highlighted every transfer to Marcus. Seeing the number on paper, not just as lines on a screen, made something in her harden. Then she called a criminal defense attorney for a friend, asking hypotheticals about blackmail. The answer was clear. Paying was never recommended. Documentation and law enforcement were, but the attorney's tone shifted the moment she described her own exposure. The advice became cautious. Be aware, you might face consequences too. Finally, she did what she had avoided from the start. She went to his home. Marcus lived in a 6th-floor loft in the Tenderloin, a building with a broken intercom and a view of the alley. Vanessa had never been there before. All their interactions had been in public places and curated spaces. His home was his ground, not hers. On the night she chose to go, she prepared with the same precision she once reserved for deals. She withdrew a small amount of cash, enough to look like a down payment. She printed the last threat and folded it into an envelope. She took a kitchen knife with a 6-inch blade and wrapped it in a dish towel, placing it at the bottom of her tote bag. Later, she told detectives she brought the knife because she was afraid he might hurt her. Prosecutors framed it differently. She brought a concealed weapon into the apartment of the man she claimed to fear after arranging the meeting on his terms, not theirs. What happened next existed in 2 versions. Vanessa's version. Marcus opened the door angry, grabbed her wrist when he saw the partial cash, and told her she was never walking away from this. She reached into her bag in panic, found the knife, and stabbed without counting. She said she didn't remember the number of blows, only the sound of him falling. The forensic version told a colder story. The first wounds were shallow, exploratory. The next ones clustered deep in his chest and abdomen, delivered from above. There were no defensive cuts on the hands, no bruises on her arms consistent with a struggle. The blood pattern suggested he had been standing when the first strike landed, then collapsed and was stabbed again while down. Afterward, she didn't run. She sat in front of his open laptop, staring at the password prompt. She tried his birthday, tried variations of his name, tried anything she could think of, but after 3 failed attempts, the system locked her out. The files she had come to destroy sat behind a screen she couldn't access. By the time officers arrived, Marcus was dead, the knife was visible, and Vanessa already had the line she would repeat, "He wouldn't let me leave." Whether that was fear speaking or rehearsal would become the central question of her trial. From the moment detectives stepped into Marcus's loft, the case split in 2. What Vanessa said happened and what the evidence suggested. On paper, the motive was clear. Forensic analysts mapped months of payments from Vanessa to Marcus, escalating transfers labeled as consulting and personal services. They pulled his encrypted files and found her booking logs, GPS traces, screenshots, and audio clips curated into a single folder with her initials. It was a blackmail dossier, organized like an investment portfolio. Victims surfaced. Another former Companion Plus clients described the same pattern: charm, then warnings about security issues, then demands for money in exchange for silence. One corporate lawyer admitted paying him tens of thousands to keep affair evidence buried. A local official described threats to leak private conversations to political rivals. Marcus was not a boyfriend. He was a professional extortionist who had finally picked the wrong target. But the question before the court wasn't whether he was a predator. It was whether Vanessa was a victim who snapped or a woman who calmly chose murder over exposure. Prosecutors focused on the physical facts. Vanessa had brought a knife into his apartment. Marcus had no defensive wounds. The stab pattern showed overkill with deep strikes after he had already fallen. Detectives found the laptop still open to a locked password screen. 3 failed login attempts logged in the minutes after Marcus's death. She had tried to delete the files but couldn't access them. Instead, she deleted the last 6 weeks of text messages from her own phone. They called it a controlled killing, disguised as panic. The defense brought a different story. They walked the jury through Marcus's leverage files, the escalating demands, the $100,000 ultimatum. The psychologist testified about coercive control, how long-term blackmail could distort judgment and trigger fight or flight responses that looked irrational from the outside. They didn't argue that Vanessa hadn't stabbed him. They argued she had been living in a cage he built. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury found a middle ground: guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. They accepted that she had been under real threat, but rejected the idea of immediate self-defense. Intent had formed before she stepped into that elevator. Vanessa was sentenced to 8 years, eligible for parole after 5. David divorced her quietly. Her firm issued a brief statement, then erased her from their website. Companion Plus vanished almost overnight, servers wiped, ownership obscured. Inside prison, Vanessa enrolled in every program that mentioned re-entry and restorative justice. She began corresponding with women who had experienced digital blackmail, offering advice from a place few wanted to admit they understood. Marcus's files, once tools of extortion, became exhibits and training seminars for cybercrime investigators. The app that started as a way to avoid awkward questions ended as a cautionary tale. In a world where every secret is stored somewhere, the most dangerous person in your life may not be the one you love or the one you cheat with, but the one you pay to keep both stories straight. If this story left you unsettled, hit that like button. It helps more people find these twisted tales. Subscribe to Wicked Crime Stories for dark, realistic crime stories that blur the line between fiction and nightmare. We drop new cases every week. Thanks for watching. Stay wicked.